So good morning. Today we're going to be working on some new tools in Adobe Illustrator. So go ahead and launch Adobe Illustrator. Make sure that it's set to inches like before, 8.5 by 11. And we're going to have it vertical like this, and we're just going to go ahead and create that. So this is pretty standard. Remember the keyboard shortcuts, Command minus, Command plus to zoom in and out. Notice that we still have our setup from last time. But if your Windows setup is a little bit different, you can always go back to Workspaces and reset your workspace, or you can work with the essentials if you haven't set it up yet. That's just going to set it up like this. I am going to go back to my original workspace. If you don't see or layout, I think is what we were using last time. And with the layout, we have the properties panels, the align and the transform. So I'm going to be working with the window workspace layout. Now what we're going to do is open up the layers palette, and we're going to be putting a document in here. You're going to download sheets 1, 2, and 3 to the desktop. And then you're going to go to File, Place, and you're going to find those sheets on your desktop. Here's sheet 1. We're going to use sheet 1. We're going to notice that it says link here, so we can actually link that. And remember, when we move this document to another location, that link is gone. And I'm just going to click it in place here so that it kind of perfectly fits in our 8.5 by 11 sheet. You'll notice that it puts it in layer 1. I'm going to just click away. I'm on the move tool, as you can see here, the V move tool, and we can kind of see through. Now what I'm going to do is create a new layer by clicking the little plus button here like we did last time. And I'm going to lock this layer 1. So I'm going to put this little lock toggle here on, so I can't now change it or move it. And I'm going to click on layer 2. If you do not click on layer 2, everything you do won't work. So the idea is we're going to be using the under area as a template to do our work. So let's get started. I'm going to Command plus a couple of times and hit the space bar key to move around. I'm going to start in the upper right or upper left hand corner, and this is just a review of using the shape tool. So I'm just going to go to the ellipse tool. I'm going to hold the shift key down, and remember, I'm holding the shift key and I can hold the space bar to move this around. So holding the shift key proportionally changes that, and then holding the space bar allows me to move it so that I can line it up perfectly. If it's not perfect, I can go back to the selection tool and just get it to be perfect. And you can kind of see right now that my fill is white and my stroke is black. And so what I'm going to do is remove the stroke color by selecting it in the bottom left here and clicking on the red line against a white background. That makes the stroke invisible. And I'm going to click the fill and double click it, and I'm just going to pick a color to do all this work with. So maybe this darker red, and hit OK. So this is my first thing. Next thing I'm going to do is go back to the ellipse tool, not hold the shift key down, but use the space bar to get this thing perfectly set up. Now if you're not sure if it's correct, you can always swap the fill with the stroke with this little swap tool, and then you can just get really close to see if it is in fact correct. If it's not, go ahead and adjust it. Notice that this is like snapping to things. Let's view and see if we've got snapping on. Let's turn this off. It says snap to point under view, and we want to remove that. This way we can actually adjust things a little bit more finely. Okay, so I'm going to turn that back to a fill, and we're going to zoom out, minus, minus, minus. We remember how we did the rectangle tool, so we start with a square. Holding the shift key down will make a perfect square, and then we were able to go to the corners here, and holding the shift key down gives us a 45-degree. And at this point I'm going to swap it and then use my V for move tool, and I'm just going to get this to line up perfectly. Okay, there. Next thing we're going to do is use, and I'll swap that fill with stroke so that now it's a solid shape. Next thing we're going to use is the Polygon tool, something we haven't used. And I'm just going to create a standard polygon. You can actually change the nature of this polygon. We'll be learning that soon. But what we're going to be doing with this polygon is actually using strokes, and using the strokes to actually create multiples. So let's go ahead and just swap the stroke here. and then adjust this polygon using the move tool till it's about the size that we want it. Remember, holding the shift key down will allow us to scale proportionally. And so you can kind of see that it's sitting in there fine. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the stroke palette. So under the properties, you have strokes here, but we also have a palette that's called stroke, and you can kind of find it in the window if you want to see it. But it's right here, and it gives us the ability to do a lot of things with the stroke. But right now, we're just going to increase the stroke until it's about the same size as the interior. I'm just going to zoom in so I can see, and that looks like it's correct. I'm just going to undo that movement there. Okay, I'm going to duplicate this. Holding the Option key down duplicates it when I move it, and I'm going to hold the Shift key down to scale it up and make the stroke smaller so that it works for the next one. You can kind of see holding the Shift key down here. There we go, and maybe a little bit bigger, and that looks pretty good. And it looks like about the right side, maybe 3 points. And then finally, the last one, I'm going to Option drag it again. Going to scale it up. Going to zoom out, Command minus minus, and move that where it needs to be. Oops, selected both. And that looks like it's pretty centered. And then I'm going to just increase the stroke again till it's about right. Now, I want these all to be in perfect alignment, so I'm just going to select all of them at the same time, and I'm going to go to my Align tab. The Properties tab also has some align features here, but you have an entire tab full, and I'm just going to center them, both top and bottom center, and now they're all centered, and therefore they're all evenly spaced. Okay, the next tool we're going to use is the Star tool. So let's get started. So you can kind of see we can make a star. Holding the Shift key down will allow us to keep it stable, and that looks like a pretty good star. Notice that the properties for this, for the stroke, it's a little bit high, so I'm going to go back down to 2 or 1 point. And obviously this is a little too small, so I'm going to hold the Shift key down until it's about the right size. And you remember how we created the rounded. I'm going to use the arrow keys just to nudge it. But remember how to use the rounded rectangles. I'm going to swap the fill here, and we're going to go and select a star, and then we're going to use the direct select tool, which is right below the selection tool. And you'll notice that all these little anchor points come up, and in essence every shape has the ability to be modified. You can kind of see, I'm going to undo that by just clicking on these anchor points and then modifying them as you want. But you also have, I'm going to click away and click here, you also have these rounded corners, and we know that if we do that, we can actually round these corners for every single one. Or if you double click 1, 2, sorry, let's see, 1, 2, you could actually round just one or unround just one corner. We did that last time. So this looks about right, so I'm going to go back to my regular selection tool, letter V, and I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger. So the idea is to be as close as possible to what I've drawn here. So let's zoom out. And so the same idea here. We're going to create a rectangle. We've done this before. And this time we're just, or a square actually, and I'm going to hold the spacebar key down so I can move it while I'm moving around here. There we go. And then we're going to use the anchor point tool, click away, click once, and then we'll be able to round this as needed. And then the same thing here, once. You can kind of see that doesn't quite work. So I'm going to change it to stroke so that I can see what I'm doing. Undo a couple times, go to stroke, and I can see why it's not exactly correct. I'm going to go back to my move tool, and I'm just going to undo. Here we go. I think okay, so I'm going to select it, get it to be exact first, and then just zoom in here, and then 1, 2, and then just modify that corner. And again, I'm careful not to modify all the corners. Click once, twice. There we go. And then it looks like the right shape, so I'm just going to swap this Next thing we're going to do is some line segments. Then the way we do lines, we go to the line segment tool. It's the one tool we haven't used in this palette. And the way you create a line is just click and hold and drag, and you can kind of see you can make it any angle you want. You could even go off the page, which I've done. So I'm going to Command 0 to bring me back and just kind of zoom in here. The way we make a straight line is to use the Shift key. So holding the Shift key down while making the line allows us to make it perfectly straight. So you can see the thickness for this line is 0, and there's no fill because it's a line. So for my stroke, I'm going to actually go to my Properties panel and increase the stroke to about 3 points, and you can kind of see what's going on. Now, I want to zoom in here so you can see, it looks like 4 points. There is a rounded head here, and my line tool has a solid. So if I went to my strokes palette, which is here, or you can get to it from Windows Stroke, you'll see that you can actually change the caps and the corners to be rounded. So I'm going to select the rounded cap, so that makes this line have a rounded cap. You can kind of see it also rounded on the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and finish all these, holding the Shift key down. And since I selected rounded caps, it'll remember. Very nice. And then the last one. And you'll notice that all of these, now I'm going to go to my selection tool. I'm going to select all of them, and I'm going to go to my align palette, and I'm going to just left align all of them so they're all snapped together here. And I'm going to distribute them all evenly vertically so that they're now perfectly evenly distributed. I can always go into these lines and select and then just grab the point here and get these to be like perfect. You can kind of see I can stretch these out if needed. And you'll see the smart guides help me with the snapping. So you'll be doing these lines as well. I'm going to just assume that you can do those as well. Now for the badges, the way you use these is we'll be using an effect. So first we'll need a tool, which is going to be an ellipse tool, and then we're going to make a perfect circle. And just a little bit, there we go. And I'm going to turn this into a fill just by filling it. And then what we're going to do is go to the effects, distort, and zigzag. And we're going to make sure that our preview is on, and then we're going to try to figure out what we will be using. Notice the size is how thick or thin these points are, and the ridges will give us more or less ridges per segment. So you can kind of like get it to be, I think, 16. There we go. And you'll notice that we have the idea, we can have everything be sharp or smooth, and I think because we had it be smooth, I'm going to go ahead and select smooth and hit OK. Now when we zoom in, we see that it's pretty close. Oops. Undo that. I'm going to click away and make sure I'm on the selection tool. We can see it's pretty close. The ridges are a little bit too pointy, and there's not as many as there should be. It seems like there's less of them. So if I go to my properties panel and I select this, I still have the ability under here, the FX here, to actually modify that effect. So I can go back in and say like the size should be a little smaller. You can kind of see that might help. Okay, and then the number of ridges could be a little bit more. You can kind of see that's more ridges are being more helpful here. So that's about, see, 20, I think 20. And then the size could be 0.6 or something. Anyway, try to get it as perfect as possible, and then you can always modify the size of the shape holding down the Shift key. Again, if you think it's almost perfectly correct, then you're pretty close. That's good enough. So we're going to do the same here. Start with a circle, holding the Shift key down, going to the zigzag effect under distort, and then we'll just make, this time we'll make the size very small and smooth, and number of ridges a little bit less. And again, if you want to see, let's see, 5, 4, 5, maybe 6, and let's make a little bit less and hit OK. Now if you want to see through, remember you can always turn it into this type of thing, and then you can kind of get this to be about right. This looks pretty good. I'm going to click away, go back to my move tool, and So now we've just made 2 badges using the circle and the zigzag tool. The next thing I want you to do is Command 0 to zero out and zoom out a couple more times. We're going to make a new artboard. We're going to go to the artboard area here, click here, and what we're going to do is make another artboard right next to the current artboard, and I'm going to approximate it to 8.5 by 11, but I'm going to make sure it is by going to width 8.5 and height 11. So now I have my artboard and the second artboard. I'm going to go back to my direct select tool, and we will be working on this now.